Lucas was a 12-year-old boy living in a rundown neighborhood that seemed forgotten by time. The streets were dusty, unpaved paths, and the houses, many of them patched together with makeshift materials, stood precariously, as if each was fighting to hold itself together. The environment around him was challenging, filled with hardships that could easily crush the spirit of any child. Yet, Lucas was no ordinary child. Despite the poverty and limitations of his surroundings, he carried within him an inner strength that few could maintain in such circumstances. His ability to see the beauty in life's simplest things made him a beacon of light amidst the shadows of the neighborhood. Lucas lived with his mother, Mrs. Rita, in a small, weather-beaten house. The modest home had only 2 rooms, functioning as a kitchen, living area, and bedroom all at once. The thin walls did little to block out the noise from their neighbors, nor did they keep out the cold during the chilly winter nights. When the rains came, the tin roof groaned under the weight of heavy raindrops, and Mrs. Rita always kept buckets scattered around to catch the leaks that inevitably appeared. But despite it all, Lucas never complained. On the contrary, he was grateful for the little they had, knowing his mother worked tirelessly to ensure they had the basics to survive. Mrs. Rita was a woman of incredible strength and resilience. She worked long hours as a housekeeper for several families in the wealthier parts of the city, leaving early in the morning and returning home only after sunset. Her face, lined with years of hard work and sacrifice, still bore a smile every evening when she saw her son. Though she wished she could offer him more, Mrs. Rita made sure that love and care filled their tiny home. Her biggest hope was that Lucas would one day rise above the limitations of their circumstances. She saved every penny she could spare to ensure Lucas stayed in school, believing education was the only path out of poverty. Lucas was a boy with dreams far bigger than his environment suggested. He didn't accept the world around him as something that was unchangeable. At school, though he was one of the poorest students, Lucas consistently stood out for his curiosity and his eagerness to learn. Geography was his favorite subject, where he would immerse himself in lessons about faraway lands and different cultures. To him, the world was much larger than the boundaries of his neighborhood, and he dreamed of traveling to those places someday. Whenever his teacher asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, Lucas would answer with enthusiasm, "I want to be an engineer and build houses so people here can have better places to live." However, despite his ambitious dreams, Lucas was fully aware of the harsh reality surrounding him. His childhood friends faced similar challenges. Many of them had already dropped out of school to work and help support their families. Lucas saw how hard everyone around him was trying to survive, and he understood the weight of their sacrifices. That awareness only deepened his gratitude for the small victories he achieved, like getting good grades or learning something new in class. The resilience Lucas developed stemmed from these experiences, teaching him that to achieve his goals, he would need to work hard and, above all, hold on to hope. Beyond his relationship with his mother, Lucas also formed a strong connection with his neighbors. Although poor, the neighborhood had a tight-knit community. People knew each other by name, and everyone looked out for one another. Lucas enjoyed spending his afternoons visiting the elderly in the neighborhood, listening to their stories about the good old days when things were different. He especially loved hearing tales of perseverance and bravery. These interactions with his older neighbors became a crucial part of his informal education, complementing what he learned at school with life lessons from those who had seen much more than he had. On weekends, Lucas found joy in playing soccer with his friends on a vacant lot near his house. The ball was old and patched up many times, but that didn't take away from the fun. Soccer was one of the few forms of entertainment available to the neighborhood children, and during those improvised matches, Lucas felt truly free. He ran across the makeshift field, kicking the ball with all his might, momentarily escaping the burdens of daily life. Between laughter, friendly shoves, and shouts of celebration, Lucas forgot about the hardships, if only for a few hours. What set Lucas apart most, however, was his willingness to help others. He never focused solely on his own needs, even when he easily could have. His generosity was known throughout the neighborhood. If a friend didn't have anything to eat, Lucas would share the sandwich his mother had packed for him. If a neighbor needed help carrying something heavy, Lucas was the first to offer his hands. He understood that in a place like his, where survival was a daily struggle, solidarity was what kept everyone going. This selfless attitude made Lucas a beloved figure in his community, not just among his peers, but also among the adults. Even though he was still a child, Lucas had a clear vision that his future depended on the choices he made in the present. He dedicated himself to his studies, knowing that education was his best chance of breaking free from the cycle of poverty that trapped so many people around him. In addition, he harbored a secret dream of one day repaying his mother for all she had done. "When I grow up, I'm going to build a big house for us," he would promise Mrs. Rita, who would smile, her eyes glistening with pride. Even though that house was still a distant dream, the conviction in Lucas's voice made it feel like a real possibility. One of Lucas's greatest hopes was to earn a scholarship to continue his education at a better school. He knew that this was the key to fulfilling his dreams and possibly changing his mother's life too. During quiet moments, alone in his small room, Lucas would imagine what the future might look like. A future where he could help his community improve, where children wouldn't have to leave school to work, and where his mother wouldn't have to sacrifice so much to keep them afloat. That desire for change fueled him every day, and every small achievement at school felt like one step closer to making that vision a reality. The connection between Lucas and his mother was the foundation of his life. Mrs. Rita, despite her exhaustion and overwhelming responsibilities, always found time to support her son, whether helping him review his school lessons or simply talking to him about his dreams and fears. She was a constant source of encouragement. Lucas, in turn, was deeply grateful for everything his mother did for him. He knew that her sacrifices would allow him to dream of something better. Often, as he lay in bed at night, Lucas would wonder how he could ever repay all the love and effort his mother had given him. He made a silent promise to himself. One day, he would build a better life for the both of them. This mutual dedication, unconditional love, and hope for a better future were what drove Lucas forward. He knew that his journey would be long and filled with obstacles, but with his mother's support and his own determination, he believed he could succeed. Despite being marked by poverty, Lucas's life was a testament to resilience, to dreams that remain alive despite all odds, and to a heart that, even in the face of hardship, found ways to spread kindness and hope. Lucas was a child with a generous soul who, despite his circumstances, chose joy and compassion as his daily companions. Deep down, Lucas knew that no matter how difficult things became, he had something that many didn't: the dream of a better future and the courage to fight for it. It was a hot summer day, the sun blazing in a cloudless sky, casting long shadows over Lucas's neighborhood. The air was thick, filled with a sense of restless energy as children ran barefoot along the dirt streets, kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. Lucas, as always, was gearing up for another soccer game with his friends on the vacant lot they called their field. That lot, a simple patch of dirt with makeshift goalposts, was where Lucas's dreams came alive. For a few precious hours, the harshness of poverty seemed to disappear, replaced by the joy of playing the game he loved. But that day was destined to be different. A day that would alter the course of Lucas's life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. On the other side of the city, where the streets were lined with gleaming skyscrapers and mansions with perfectly manicured lawns, lived Mr. Almeida, a wealthy yet deeply lonely man. Known for his vast fortune and business acumen, Mr. Almeida was the type of man others envied. However, behind the facade of success and luxury, he carried an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. At 60, he had achieved everything he had set out to in the business world. Yet he found himself increasingly disillusioned. His days were filled with meetings, deals, and obligations, but his nights were haunted by a profound sense of isolation. Despite all his material success, Mr. Almeida had come to realize that something essential was missing from his life. That day, feeling particularly dissatisfied with his usual routine, Mr. Almeida made an impulsive decision. He would take a walk alone. It was something he rarely did, always accompanied by security or a driver. But today, he wanted to break free from the familiar and see the city from a different perspective. He set out on foot, wandering through parts of the city he had never visited, places far removed from his usual surroundings. Drawn by curiosity and a vague desire to reconnect with something real, he found himself walking toward areas where the glittering wealth of the city gave way to more modest neighborhoods. As Mr. Almeida moved away from the towering buildings and pristine avenues, the cityscape began to change. The streets were narrower, the buildings older, and the signs of wear and tear were everywhere. Houses stood with peeling paint, cracked windows, and crumbling facades. The people he passed by had faces marked by hard work and struggle, carrying the weight of their everyday lives in their tired expressions. Almeida felt a slight discomfort as he continued, knowing he was far from the world he inhabited. Yet at the same time, there was something compelling about this place, a rawness that he hadn't seen in years. He kept walking, drawn deeper into this unfamiliar world. That's when Mr. Almeida first saw Lucas. The boy was playing soccer with a group of friends on the vacant lot, his face lit up with pure joy. Despite the worn-out ball they were kicking around in the rough, uneven ground, the boys were completely absorbed in their game. For Lucas, this lot was more than just dirt and makeshift goalposts. It was a place where, even for a short time, he could escape the struggles of his everyday life and be just like any other kid. His laughter, his shouts of encouragement to his teammates, echoed through the streets. Mr. Almeida stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold before him. He had never seen such unfiltered happiness, especially not in circumstances like these. To the millionaire, who was used to seeing wealth equated with joy, this was a revelation. Here were these boys, playing with an old soccer ball on a dusty lot, with nothing but their friends and the game to bring them happiness. For a moment, Mr. Almeida felt something stir within him, a flicker of recognition, a memory of his own childhood when things were simpler and life was about the little things. Lucas noticed a man standing on the edge of the field, dressed in fine clothes that were completely out of place in the neighborhood. Mr. Almeida stood out like a sore thumb, but Lucas, always quick to greet strangers with a smile, didn't see the man's wealth or status. He saw someone who, for whatever reason, was watching them play. Without hesitation, Lucas jogged over to the sidelines and, with his trademark friendliness, called out, "Hey, mister, do you want to join us?" Mr. Almeida, taken aback by the boy's invitation, hesitated for a moment. No one had invited him to do something so simple, so genuine in a very long time. In his world, people didn't offer invitations unless they had something to gain from it. But here, in this dusty lot, a boy he didn't even know was asking him to play a game of soccer. There was no ulterior motive, just a pure, spontaneous offer of friendship. Almeida, who had spent so many years surrounded by people who only saw him as a businessman, a figure of wealth and influence, was suddenly stripped of those labels. For the first time in years, he felt like just a man. He smiled somewhat nervously and nodded. The boys welcomed him with laughter and open arms, and soon, Mr. Almeida found himself in the middle of the game. At first, he was awkward and used to the physicality and spontaneity of it all. He stumbled a bit as he tried to keep up with the energetic boys, their enthusiasm far outstripping his own agility. But slowly, as the game went on, Almeida found himself loosening up. The laughter of the boys was infectious, and he began to enjoy himself in a way he hadn't in years. For those precious minutes, Mr. Almeida wasn't a millionaire, a businessman, or a man burdened by the weight of his success. He was just another player on the field, kicking the ball, laughing along with the boys, and feeling a joy that money had never been able to buy him. Lucas, always encouraging and kind, made sure to include him in every play, treating him not as an outsider, but as a part of the team. As the game came to an end, the boys began to disperse, heading back to their homes, still talking excitedly about the match. But Lucas lingered, his natural curiosity drawing him back to Mr. Almeida. "You play pretty well for someone who's not used to it, Lucas said with a grin, clearly teasing. Almeida laughed, fully aware that he hadn't played soccer well at all, but appreciative of the boy's kind words nonetheless. There was something about Lucas, his kindness, his openness, that touched Almeida deeply. The boy was so unlike the people he was used to dealing with in his everyday life. Lucas wasn't interested in who Almeida was or how much money he had. He didn't care about business deals or wealth. All Lucas saw was a person, and that was enough. Almeida, who had spent years surrounded by people who viewed him through the lens of his fortune, was profoundly moved by the boy's simple, unselfish nature. After that day, Mr. Almeida couldn't stop thinking about Lucas. The boy had left an indelible mark on him, awakening feelings and thoughts that had been buried beneath years of ambition and success. The millionaire returned to his mansion, but the joy he had felt playing soccer with Lucas and his friends lingered in his heart. For the first time in years, Almeida felt like he had found something real, something that mattered more than the deals he had made or the money he had earned. Determined to give back to Lucas and the children of the neighborhood, Mr. Almeida began to form a plan. He wanted to help, to use his wealth to make a difference in their lives. He imagined building a proper soccer field for the boys, funding improvements to the school, and creating spaces where the community could thrive. To him, it seemed like the natural solution. After all, money was what he knew best, and he was certain that by offering financial support, he could transform the lives of those children. Yet, Mr. Almeida had no idea that what Lucas truly wanted wasn't money. When Almeida returned to the neighborhood, full of plans to donate large sums to improve the community, Lucas greeted him again with that same bright smile. But when Almeida presented his offer, a new soccer field, donations for the school, and more, Lucas's response was something the millionaire could never have anticipated. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need your money," Lucas said, his voice steady and sincere. Mr. Almeida was stunned. How could Lucas reject such a generous offer? What could possibly be more important than the improvements Almeida was proposing? Lucas, sensing his confusion, explained softly, "What we really need here isn't just things. We need people who care about us, people who show up. I don't want you to just give us money. I want you to come back, to spend time with us. That's what matters the most." Those words hit Mr. Almeida like a tidal wave. For years, he had believed that money could solve any problem. But Lucas had just opened his eyes to something he had long forgotten. The boy didn't want wealth. He wanted connection, time, and friendship. And in that moment, Almeida realized that Lucas had given him something far more valuable than money could ever buy, a chance to reconnect with his humanity. In the days following his first encounter with Lucas, Mr. Almeida found himself unable to shake the thoughts of the boy and the joy he had witnessed on that dusty soccer field. The boy's sincerity and the simplicity of his world had touched something deep inside Almeida, something he hadn't felt in years. After a life spent amassing wealth and navigating the complexities of business, Lucas had shown him a new kind of wealth, a wealth rooted in connection, friendship, and genuine human interaction. Almeida, a man used to solving problems with money, believed he had found a way to repay Lucas for the gift he had unknowingly given him. Almeida spent several days developing a plan, one he believed would not only help Lucas, but also improve the lives of all the children in the neighborhood. He envisioned building a new soccer field with real goals and fresh grass, replacing the dusty, uneven lot where Lucas and his friends played. He imagined making donations to Lucas's school, ensuring it had the resources to provide better education for the children in the community. Perhaps, Almeida thought, he could even fund community centers, giving the neighborhood access to programs, activities, and a space where they could gather and grow together. In his mind, it was a perfect solution. Money was what he had, and with it, he could bring real change. Returning to the neighborhood, Mr. Almeida was filled with excitement. He was confident that his offer would be met with gratitude and joy. As he approached the vacant lot, he saw Lucas once again playing with his friends. The sight of the boy running and laughing on that dusty field reminded Almeida of why he had decided to act. He walked toward Lucas with a sense of purpose, his heart racing slightly as he prepared to present his generous offer. Lucas, noticing Mr. Almeida approaching, ran over with his usual bright smile. "Hey, mister, are you here to play again?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Almeida smiled warmly and shook his head. "Not today, Lucas. I came to talk to you about something important," he said, his tone serious but kind. Lucas, ever curious, tilted his head slightly. "Important? What is it?" Almeida took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Lucas, I've been thinking about how I can help. I know how much you love soccer, so I want to build a new soccer field for you and your friends. One with real grass, proper goals, and everything you need. And I don't want to stop there. I'm also planning to donate money to your school so that it can get the resources it needs to improve. And maybe if we can, I'd like to fund a community center where you and everyone in the neighborhood can gather. It's all for you, Lucas. You just have to say yes." There was a moment of silence as Lucas absorbed what Mr. Almeida had just said. The boy's face, usually so full of joy and light, slowly grew more serious. Almeida stood there, waiting for the smile, the excitement, the gratitude he expected to follow. But instead, Lucas looked down at the ground, his expression thoughtful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lucas raised his head, his eyes meeting Almeida's. "Thank you, Mr. Almeida," Lucas began, his voice steady and sincere. "I really appreciate everything you're offering, but I can't accept it." Mr. Almeida blinked, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. "What do you mean, Lucas?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I'm offering you everything you and your friends need to make things better here. Why wouldn't you accept that?" Lucas smiled softly, but there was a wisdom in his eyes that made Almeida pause. "I know money can help in a lot of ways," Lucas said, choosing his words carefully. "But what we really need here isn't just things. It's not about having a new soccer field or more money at school. What we need is for people to care about us, to spend time with us. We don't just need donations. We need you. Your time, your friendship. That's what really matters." For the first time in his life, Mr. Almeida was at a loss for words. He had never imagined that anyone, especially a boy like Lucas, would turn down such an offer. To Almeida, money had always been the solution to every problem. When something needed fixing, you threw money at it until it was resolved. But Lucas was showing him a truth he had never considered. Not all problems could be solved with wealth. What Lucas wanted was something much more precious than money. He wanted connection, presence, and genuine care. Almeida stood there, feeling the weight of Lucas's words pressing down on him. He had come expecting to be the hero, the savior who would fix everything with a checkbook. But Lucas had revealed to him that true heroism wasn't about providing material goods. It was about showing up, about being there for others in a meaningful way. Almeida realized that, in all his years of building businesses and accumulating wealth, he had lost sight of what really mattered. Tears began to well up in Almeida's eyes. For a man who had spent his life mastering the art of control over his finances, his companies, and even his emotions, this moment of vulnerability was overwhelming. The tears spilled over, streaming down his face as he stood before Lucas, feeling completely unprepared for the depth of the boy's wisdom. He wasn't crying because his offer had been rejected. He was crying because, for the first time in years, he understood how far he had strayed from the values that truly mattered. Lucas watched quietly as Almeida cried, showing no sign of discomfort or surprise. In his young heart, Lucas already understood something that many adults never grasp, that sometimes the most powerful moments are born from vulnerability. "It's okay, Mr. Almeida," Lucas said gently, stepping closer to place a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "You don't have to give us anything. We just want you to be here with us. That's what makes a difference." Almeida, still overwhelmed by emotion, nodded slowly. In that moment, he realized that Lucas had given him something far more valuable than the opportunity to give away money. He had given Almeida the chance to reconnect with his own humanity, to find meaning in relationships rather than transactions. Lucas, in his innocence and simplicity, had broken through the walls Almeida had spent a lifetime building around himself. From that day forward, Almeida's outlook on life began to change. He no longer saw himself as the wealthy benefactor, the man who could solve problems with his fortune. Instead, he saw himself as part of something much larger, a community where relationships mattered more than wealth, where presence mattered more than power. Lucas's rejection of the money had been a gift in disguise, one that opened Almeida's eyes to a new way of living. He would return to the neighborhood, not as a distant philanthropist, but as a friend, ready to invest his most valuable resource, his time. And Lucas, ever the guide in this new journey, would continue to teach Almeida the most important lesson of all, that the true measure of a person's wealth is not in their bank account, but in the connections they build and the love they give. After Lucas's surprising rejection of his offer, Mr. Almeida felt an emotional shift that would change his life forever. The boy's words echoed in his mind, unraveling years of beliefs that had been ingrained in him, that money could solve any problem. Lucas had rejected his wealth, not out of pride, but because he had wanted something more meaningful: connection, presence, and genuine friendship. Almeida realized that what Lucas desired most was not material improvements, but the involvement of people who truly cared. For someone who had spent his life believing that wealth was the key to happiness, this revelation was both humbling and transformative. In the days following that encounter, Almeida found himself in deep reflection. He spent long hours sitting alone in his mansion, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens, thinking about his life. He realized that, despite all the success and luxury that surrounded him, he was alone. The people in his life, the ones he entertained at lavish parties or met in corporate boardrooms, were there because of his wealth, not because of who he truly was. It was an uncomfortable truth to face, but one he could no longer ignore. For years, Almeida had been filling the emptiness inside him with possessions, thinking that if he just accumulated more, the void would eventually disappear. But it hadn't. And now, thanks to Lucas, he understood why. Almeida knew he had to change. The time for simply throwing money at problems was over. He wanted to do something real, something that would make a lasting difference, not only for Lucas and his friends, but also for himself. He felt a new sense of purpose growing inside him, one that had little to do with his fortune and everything to do with the relationships he could build. He realized that if he was going to make a difference in Lucas's community, he couldn't just be a distant benefactor. He needed to be present, to offer not just his resources, but also his time and heart. Driven by this newfound sense of purpose, Almeida returned to Lucas's neighborhood. This time, he wasn't coming with grand plans to donate large sums of money. He was coming with an open mind and a willingness to listen. As he walked through the familiar streets, he was greeted with smiles and waves from the children who recognized him. For the first time, he felt like more than just an outsider. When he saw Lucas, the boy greeted him with the same warmth and joy as always. "Good to see you again, Mr. Almeida," Lucas said. Running over to him, Almeida smiled, feeling a sense of belonging that he hadn't experienced in years. "It's good to be back, Lucas," he replied, his heart full. Over the next few weeks, Almeida immersed himself in the life of the neighborhood. He spent time talking to the residents, getting to know their stories, their struggles, and their dreams. He listened to the parents who worked tirelessly to provide for their families, to the children who dreamed of brighter futures, and to the elders who had seen the neighborhood change over the decades. For the first time in his life, Almeida wasn't focused on profits or business strategies. He was focused on people, on the connections he could make, and on the ways he could help beyond just writing a check. Lucas was by his side through it all. The boy had become more than just an inspiration. He was Almeida's guide in navigating this new world. With Lucas's help, Almeida began to see the true needs of the community, needs that went far beyond material things. Yes, the neighborhood could benefit from better infrastructure, but what it needed most was hope, trust, and a sense of unity. Lucas understood this instinctively, and his wisdom continued to guide Almeida in his efforts to make a real impact. Together, Lucas and Almeida began to brainstorm ways they could help the community. But instead of focusing on what they could build or buy, they centered their plans on how they could bring people together. Lucas had always believed that the strength of the neighborhood lay in its people, and Almeida quickly came to share that belief. They decided that rather than simply funding projects, they would work with the community to create spaces where people could come together, share their talents, and support one another. Their first project was to transform the vacant lot where Lucas and his friends played soccer. But instead of hiring contractors to come in and do all the work, Almeida and Lucas rallied the community to help. Parents, teenagers, and even the elderly came out to lend a hand. Some brought tools, others brought food, and everyone contributed in some way. The project wasn't just about building a soccer field. It was about building relationships and creating a space that belonged to everyone. And as the field slowly took shape, it became a symbol of what the community could accomplish when it worked together. Throughout the process, Almeida was there every step of the way. He helped carry materials, consulted with local workers, and even got his hands dirty alongside the rest of the community. It was a far cry from the world of boardrooms and luxury, but Almeida had never felt more fulfilled. He was no longer just an observer. He was part of the fabric of the neighborhood. And in return, the neighborhood embraced him, not as a millionaire, but as one of their own. As the soccer field neared completion, the excitement in the neighborhood grew. The field, with its freshly laid grass and sturdy goalposts, was more than just a place to play. It was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together. On the day of the grand opening, the entire neighborhood gathered to celebrate. There were games, food, music, and laughter. Children ran across the field, their faces lit with joy, while parents and elders looked on with pride. It was a day of pure happiness, and Almeida stood in the middle of it all, feeling more alive than he had in years. But the soccer field was just the beginning. With Lucas by his side, Almeida continued to work with the community to create more opportunities for connection and growth. They started a tutoring program for the younger kids, where older students and volunteers from the neighborhood helped those who were struggling in school. They organized community events, bringing people together to share meals, tell stories, and celebrate their culture. And through it all, Almeida remained a constant presence, not as an outsider offering charity, but as a true friend and partner. Lucas, who had always believed in the power of community, became a symbol of hope for the neighborhood. His leadership, combined with Almeida's support, inspired others to step up and get involved. What had once been a neighborhood marked by hardship and isolation was now a place where people felt connected, supported, and hopeful for the future. The change wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. And Lucas, with his unwavering belief in the power of people, was at the heart of it all. For Almeida, the transformation was nothing short of life-changing. He had come to the neighborhood expecting to fix things with his wealth, but in the process, he had been fixed himself. Lucas had taught him that the most valuable thing he could offer wasn't his money, but his presence. And in being present, truly present, Almeida had found the sense of fulfillment and connection that had eluded him for so long. He no longer felt like a man defined by his fortune. Instead, he felt like someone who had finally discovered what it meant to live a rich life, one filled with meaning, friendship, and purpose. As the months passed, the bond between Lucas and Almeida only grew stronger. Their partnership, which had begun with a simple game of soccer, had blossomed into something far deeper. Together, they had transformed not just a neighborhood, but themselves. Almeida had found a new purpose, one that had nothing to do with business or wealth, but everything to do with making a difference in the lives of others. And Lucas, with his unshakable belief in the power of people, had shown everyone, Almeida included, that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love and connections we build with one another. As time passed, the friendship between Lucas and Mr. Almeida became something truly remarkable. What had started as a chance encounter between a wealthy man and a poor boy grew into a deep, enduring partnership. Lucas, with his innate kindness and wisdom beyond his years, had profoundly impacted Almeida's life. And Almeida, in turn, had become more than just a benefactor. He had become a friend, mentor, and a part of the community. Together, they had not only transformed each other, but also sparked a wave of change that rippled throughout the neighborhood. But the heart of their bond was not in the grand gestures or the projects they initiated. It was in the small, everyday moments. The quiet conversations they shared while walking through the streets, watching the children play, or sitting on Mrs. Rita's worn-out porch with a cup of coffee in hand. These simple interactions were filled with genuine connection, laughter, and wisdom that flowed naturally between the two. Lucas, though still a child, had a perspective on life that never ceased to amaze Almeida. His ability to see beyond the surface, to understand that real change came from the heart and not from wealth, made him a constant source of inspiration. Almeida, a man who had spent decades surrounded by people with ulterior motives and transactional relationships, found himself disarmed by Lucas's honesty and purity. There were no hidden agendas in Lucas's friendship. He didn't want money, favors, or connections. He wanted companionship, laughter, and time spent together. This authenticity, this pure form of human connection, was something Almeida had been missing for most of his life. It was through Lucas that Almeida began to rediscover the simple joys that he had long forgotten. As their friendship deepened, so did the changes in the community. The soccer field they had built together wasn't just a physical space. It had become the heart of the neighborhood. Families gathered there in the evenings. Children played and laughed, and adults came together to talk about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. There was a sense of unity growing, a feeling that they were all part of something bigger. And at the center of it all was Lucas, the boy who had taught an entire community that true wealth came from togetherness. The transformation of the neighborhood didn't go unnoticed. People who had once viewed Almeida with suspicion began to see him differently. He was no longer the wealthy outsider, swooping in to save them with his money. He had become one of them, someone who cared, who listened, and who worked alongside them. His presence, rather than his financial contributions, was what made the difference. For Almeida, this was a revelation. He had spent so many years thinking that his value was tied to his wealth, but now he understood that the most valuable thing he could offer was himself. Lucas, on the other hand, became something of a local hero. His leadership, his vision, and his unshakable belief in the power of community had inspired everyone around him. He never sought recognition, but people naturally looked to him for guidance. Even the adults in the neighborhood began to turn to Lucas for advice, seeing in him a wisdom that belied his age. Lucas's humility only made him more beloved. He never acted as though he was special or different. He was just Lucas, a boy who wanted to make his neighborhood a better place. One day, as Almeida and Lucas were walking together through the now bustling soccer field, Lucas turned to Almeida with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what we've done here?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet but full of meaning. Almeida smiled, looking around at the joyful scene in front of them. "All the time, Lucas. All the time," he replied, his heart swelling with pride. But Lucas wasn't just thinking about the past. He was thinking about the future. "I feel like this is just the beginning," Lucas continued. "There's so much more we can do. Not just here, but in other neighborhoods too. If we can make a difference here, why can't we do the same in other places?" Almeida nodded, impressed once again by Lucas's vision. The boy wasn't satisfied with what they had already achieved. He was always looking forward, always thinking about how to help more people. And Almeida, who had spent much of his life chasing financial goals, now found himself inspired by Lucas's endless drive to create positive change. "You're right," Almeida said. "This is just the beginning, and whatever you want to do next, I'll be right there with you." With that, the two began to discuss their next steps. Lucas had a plan to start a mentorship program at the community center, pairing older students and adults with younger children who needed guidance. He envisioned a space where everyone could learn from each other, where knowledge and experience could be shared freely. Almeida, now fully invested in this vision, offered not just financial support, but also his own time and expertise. He volunteered to teach business and financial literacy to anyone in the neighborhood who wanted to learn. It was his way of giving back, of using the skills he had honed over a lifetime to help others build a better future. The mentorship program was a huge success. It didn't just help the children, it brought the entire community closer together. People who had never spoken to one another before now sat side by side, sharing stories and learning from each other. The community center, which Lucas and Almeida had built together, became more than just a place for recreation. It became a hub of knowledge, growth, and mutual support. Lucas's vision of a strong, united neighborhood was coming to life, and Almeida couldn't have been prouder to be a part of it. Over time, their work began to attract attention from outside the neighborhood. Other communities started to take notice of what Lucas and Almeida were doing, and soon, people from across the city were coming to visit the community center, hoping to replicate its success in their own areas. Lucas, who had never sought the spotlight, found himself at the center of a movement. But even as the attention grew, he remained humble, always focused on the people around him rather than on any accolades. Almeida, watching Lucas's growth as a leader, felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. He had gone into this partnership thinking that he would be the one teaching Lucas, but in reality, Lucas had taught him far more. The boy had shown him the true meaning of wealth, of success, and of happiness. And now, as their work began to spread beyond the borders of their own neighborhood, Almeida knew that their legacy would be one of lasting change, one that would continue to inspire others for years to come. The bond between Lucas and Almeida, forged through their shared mission to improve the lives of others, became unbreakable. Together, they had created something far more valuable than any material possession, a legacy of hope, friendship, and community. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their work was far from over. There were more neighborhoods to help, more lives to touch, and more opportunities to show the world that when people come together, they can create something truly extraordinary. For Lucas and Almeida, the journey wasn't just about transforming a neighborhood. It was about transforming themselves and, in the process, proving that even the most unlikely friendships can lead to the most powerful changes. Their legacy of change would live on, not just in the soccer fields and community centers they built, but in the hearts of everyone they inspired. As Lucas and Mr. Almeida's project blossomed, their neighborhood began to experience significant change. The community center they had built became the heart of the area, a place where children played safely, adults gathered to discuss improvements, and families found support. There was a sense of hope in the air, as though the neighborhood was finally beginning to believe that better days were possible. But with progress came unexpected challenges, and resistance soon surfaced, testing the strength of Lucas, Almeida, and the bonds they had worked so hard to build. Shortly after the center's grand opening, rumors started circulating. Despite the positive impact the center was having, some in the neighborhood remained suspicious of Almeida's involvement. They whispered about his motives, questioning why a wealthy man with no real ties to their community would invest so much time and money. To them, it seemed too good to be true. After years of broken promises and unfulfilled government aid, a few residents had grown skeptical of any outside help. This skepticism quickly morphed into distrust, with some even suggesting that Almeida was using the community for his own hidden agenda. Lucas, sensitive to the changing mood, picked up on the tension almost immediately. He heard the murmurs during the community meetings, saw the doubtful glances whenever Almeida's name was mentioned, and sensed the growing unease among his neighbors. It was heartbreaking for Lucas. He knew that Almeida's intentions were genuine, that the man had changed and truly wanted to be a part of their community. Lucas had witnessed that transformation firsthand, and it pained him to see people questioning Almeida's sincerity. Yet, Lucas understood that trust was fragile in a place where people had been let down too many times before. Things escalated when a group of disillusioned residents took matters into their own hands. One morning, Lucas arrived at the community center to find that one of its walls had been defaced with graffiti. Angry red letters spelled out, "Go home, rich man, and you don't belong here." Lucas stood frozen, staring at the hateful messages, his heart sinking. This was not the community he believed in, and this was certainly not the way he wanted Almeida to be treated. But what hurt the most was knowing how Almeida, who had given so much of himself to the project, would feel when he saw the vandalism. When Almeida arrived later that day, Lucas braced himself for the Millionaire'S reaction. The graffiti, though crude, carried a deeper message. It wasn't just about the vandalism. It was about a community still struggling with its past, still wary of outsiders who claimed they wanted to help. Almeida, upon seeing the defaced walls, didn't show anger. Instead, a deep sadness came over him. He had worked tirelessly to prove he was committed to the community, but now he faced a harsh reality that his efforts might not be enough to win everyone over. "Maybe I'm not welcome here after all," Almeida said quietly, his voice heavy with doubt. Lucas, who had always been the optimist, wasn't ready to give up. He knew how much Almeida's presence meant to the neighborhood, even if not everyone recognized it yet. "They just don't understand, Mr. Almeida," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the frustration boiling inside him. "People here have been hurt before and they're scared, but we can't let a few angry people stop us. We've already come this far, and I believe in what we're doing, and I believe in you." Almeida looked at Lucas and for a moment saw the same unwavering hope that had inspired him in the first place. Despite the setbacks, Lucas had never lost faith in their mission. And if Lucas still believed, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward. "You're right, Lucas," Almeida replied, forcing a small smile. "We can't stop now. Not when there's so much more to do." Determined to address the growing tensions, Lucas and Almeida decided to organize a series of community meetings where residents could voice their concerns openly. They hoped that by encouraging dialogue, they could clear up misunderstandings and rebuild trust. Lucas, always wise beyond his years, took on the role of mediator, explaining the purpose of the meetings and encouraging his neighbors to speak their minds. "We're all in this together," Lucas said, standing in front of the crowd at the first meeting. "This community belongs to all of us, and we need to make sure everyone feels heard." The first meeting was tense. Many residents arrived with their arms crossed and their faces hardened with skepticism. Some questioned Almeida's intentions outright, while others expressed concerns about the future of the community center. "What happens when you leave, Mr. Almeida?" One woman asked bluntly. "How do we know you won't just disappear like all the others before you? What will happen to this place if you're not here anymore?" The room fell silent as Almeida prepared to respond. He could feel the weight of their doubts pressing down on him, but he also understood where those doubts came from. These were people who had seen promises made and broken time and time again. "I understand your concerns," Almeida began, his voice calm and sincere. "And I won't pretend that I can erase the past or guarantee the future. But what I can promise is this: I'm not going anywhere. I'm here because I care about this community, and I want to be a part of its future. This center doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of you. I'm just here to help in whatever way I can." Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. While some remained unconvinced, others could see the genuine emotion in Almeida's words. The meetings continued over the next few weeks, and gradually, the mood in the neighborhood began to shift. Almeida's consistent presence, along with Lucas's steady leadership, started to win people over. They saw that this wasn't a fleeting project or a publicity stunt. It was real, and it was theirs. But just as things were starting to settle, a new challenge emerged, one far greater than any they had faced before. News spread that a powerful developer had its eyes on the neighborhood. Plans for a massive luxury development were already in motion, and if they went through, the entire community, including the beloved center, would be at risk of being demolished. The project promised to bring in wealthier residents and high-end businesses, but it would also displace countless families who had lived there for generations. The very soul of the neighborhood was at stake. Lucas was devastated when he heard the news. After everything they had built, it seemed impossible that they could lose it all to corporate greed. But rather than letting the despair take over, Lucas channeled his frustration into action. He gathered the community, urging them to fight back. "We can't let them take what we've worked so hard to build," he told them. "This isn't just about a building. It's about our home, our community, our future. We have to stand together. Almeida, too, was ready to fight. He used every resource at his disposal to help the community prepare for the legal battle ahead. He connected with activists, organized protests, and worked closely with lawyers to challenge the development. It was a daunting task, but Almeida had learned from Lucas that when a community stands together, they can overcome even the greatest odds. As the fight against the development heated up, the neighborhood became a symbol of resistance. Word spread about their struggle, and soon, the media and activists from across the city were rallying behind them. The community center became the headquarters for the movement, a place where residents gathered to plan, strategize, and find strength in each other. And at the heart of it all was Lucas, leading the charge with the same determination and passion that had won Almeida over from the start. In the end, their hard work paid off. After months of protests, negotiations, and public outcry, the developers' plans were halted. The community had won. The threat of losing everything they had built was gone, and in its place was a renewed sense of pride and solidarity. The victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a triumph of spirit. Lucas and Almeida had faced resistance, distrust, and seemingly insurmountable challenges, but they had come out stronger on the other side. Together, they had shown the neighborhood and the world that real change doesn't come from money or power. It comes from people who believe in each other and refuse to give up. The triumph over the developer was a major victory for the community. But as Lucas and Mr. Almeida knew well, every victory came with its own set of challenges. Even as the neighborhood celebrated the preservation of their homes and the community center, a new sense of responsibility set in. They had won the battle, but now they had to prove that the community could continue to thrive without being overshadowed by outside forces. For Lucas and Almeida, the fight wasn't over. It had simply entered a new phase, one that required the same determination and unity that had carried them through before. After the legal victory, the community center became even more important. It was no longer just a place where children played and adults gathered. It was now a symbol of resistance, resilience, and hope. But with that new significance came new pressures. There was an expectation that the center would continue to be a beacon of progress for the entire neighborhood, a place where people could come together not just to socialize, but to build a future. Lucas felt the weight of these expectations. Though still young, he had become the face of the community's success, and with that came both admiration and responsibility. He knew that people were looking to him for guidance, and that while they had won an important battle, the real work had just begun. The victory against the developer was only the first step. Now, they had to ensure that their community remained strong, united, and capable of facing whatever challenges might come next. As the weeks passed, Lucas threw himself into the work. He spent hours at the community center, organizing activities for the children, setting up educational programs, and hosting meetings with local residents to discuss their needs and concerns. The center was thriving, but Lucas could feel the strain. He was trying to balance everything: his schoolwork, his responsibilities at the center, and the expectations of the neighborhood. And it was starting to take a toll on him. Almeida, who had watched Lucas grow into a remarkable leader, noticed the changes in the boy. Lucas, once so full of energy and optimism, now seemed tired, worn down by the constant demands on his time and attention. Almeida, having experienced the same pressures in his own life, recognized the signs of burnout. He knew that Lucas, despite his strength, couldn't carry the burden of the entire community on his own. One afternoon, as Lucas sat at a table in the community center, surrounded by papers and notebooks filled with plans and ideas, Almeida sat down beside him. "Lucas," he said gently, "you've done more for this community than anyone could have imagined, but you can't do it all by yourself." Lucas looked up from his work, the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "I know, but if I don't keep pushing, who will? There's so much more we need to do, and people are counting on me." Almeida smiled, remembering how he had once felt the same way. "I understand how you feel, but leadership isn't about doing everything on your own. It's about empowering others to step up and share the responsibility. This community has come a long way, and that's because of you." But now it's time to let other people take some of the weight off your shoulders. Lucas listened carefully, considering Almeida's words. He had always believed that change came from people working together, but somewhere along the way, he had started to believe that the success of the community rested entirely on his shoulders. Now, he realized that true leadership wasn't about carrying the burden alone. It was about creating a team, a network of people who could all contribute to the greater good. With Almeida's guidance, Lucas began to delegate more of the responsibilities to others in the community. He encouraged his peers to take on leadership roles, organizing their own events and helping with the day-to-day operations of the center. He reached out to the adults, asking them to take more active roles in the mentoring programs and community meetings. Slowly, Lucas began to see that the strength of the neighborhood didn't rely on him alone. It relied on the collective effort of everyone who lived there. As more people stepped up to help, Lucas found himself with a renewed sense of energy. The community center, once a symbol of his own personal struggle to improve the neighborhood, had now become a true community effort. Everyone played a part, and the neighborhood grew stronger because of it. But even as the community thrived, a new, unexpected challenge emerged. A severe economic downturn began to affect the city, and many of the families in Lucas's neighborhood were hit hard. Jobs became scarce, and those who had been struggling to make ends meet found it even harder to provide for their families. The optimism that had filled the neighborhood after their victory against the developer began to fade, replaced by the harsh realities of financial hardship. Lucas, determined to help his community weather the storm, called another meeting at the center. This time, instead of focusing on programs for the children or educational initiatives, the discussion centered on how they could support one another during this difficult time. Ideas were shared about pooling resources, creating a neighborhood food bank, and organizing job search workshops. Lucas and Almeida worked together, using Almeida's connections to bring in local businesses and organizations that could offer support. But the challenges didn't stop there. With the economic downturn came an increase in crime, as desperation led some to take extreme measures to survive. The sense of safety that had been restored to the neighborhood began to erode, and fear started to creep back into the minds of the residents. Lucas, who had always seen his neighborhood as a place of hope, now saw the cracks in that hope, and it shook him to his core. Almeida, sensing Lucas's frustration, reminded him of a lesson he had learned long ago. Progress is never linear. Every community faces setbacks, Lucas, Almeida said. But what matters is how we respond to them. We've built something strong here, strong enough to weather the storm. We just need to keep believing in it. Lucas took those words to heart. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they had come too far to turn back now. He continued to work alongside Almeida and the community, focusing on what they could control and finding ways to support each other through the challenges. The economic struggles were real, and the impact on the neighborhood was undeniable. But Lucas refused to let despair take over. As the months passed, the neighborhood slowly began to recover. The community center, once again, became a source of strength and resilience. Families leaned on each other, sharing resources, time, and hope. Lucas had learned that leadership wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about facing them head-on with the support of those around you. In the end, Lucas and Almeida had faced their greatest test yet. The community had been shaken, but not broken. And through it all, Lucas had emerged as not just a leader, but as a symbol of what true leadership looked like. Empowering others, standing strong in the face of adversity, and never giving up on the people who depend on you. Lucas's journey wasn't over, and neither was the story of the neighborhood. There would be more challenges, more hardships, and more victories. But whatever the future held, Lucas knew one thing for sure. As long as they faced it together, they could overcome anything. Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care